So the contest begins.
Yeah!
There is so much death metal this year, it's going to take multiple videos to get through it all.
It's too much! It's too much!
And we're starting with Apogean with Cyberstrictive. This is the latest project featuring Max Smith, who has done killer vocals for Croesus, Alter Beast, and Hammer of Dawn. I'm a big fan of what he brings to the table, and it just is gnarly, technical, great brutality, but also melodic riffing, some irresistible grooves, dizzying guitar work, just expertly woven into some great progressive songwriting too. This is going to perfection. Next up we have Master with Saints Dispelled. This band was formed in Chicago in 1983, but currently located in Czechia, apparently. Saints Dispelled is their 15th album, and it still brings that early thrash and D-beat-infused sound, leading some to call them the Motorhead of death metal. Riffs come fast and hard alongside a vocal performance where every syllable sounds like Paul just spewing vomit on the stage. Fun if a little repetitive and fairly familiar, so I put it at good tier. Next up we have Exocrine with Legend. Big fan of this French tech death band and already on album 6, so pretty prolific at this point. Each album seems to pretty much get better and better too. Chaotic but always infectious guitar work and the occasional explosion of saxophone on here too. So this is another must listen for modern death metal. Compositions run the gamut from techie groovers to more, again, progressive and also introspective territory on tracks like Dragon and even some kind of like symphonic moments as well. Not my like favorite from them overall, but I have not had an album from them that I haven't really enjoyed. It's going to fantastic. Then we have Engulf with The Dying Planet Weeps. Engulf is basically what you get when you combine OSDM vocals a la John Tardy and Morbid Angel grooves with the more technical and dissonant instrumentation of Gorguts and Ulcerate. It's a very unsettling listen, ripe with sudden pace changes and some more lurching, churning guitar work, and as if that's not good enough on its own, you can also add an impressive list of guest musicians from Darkened, Aborted, Alluvial, Hideous Divinity, Near Death Condition, among others. Some of them we will be talking about in this very list, but this is going to amazing. Then we have Pestilength with Solar Clorex. Truly sickening stuff in this third album from this band out of Spain. Vocals sounding like a giant gurgling and just hacking up of bile alongside lurching, doomy guitars that are equally nauseating. Then there's some surprising softer sections as well, though. I could draw some mild comparisons to Artificial Brain and Afterbirth, but this is still kind of its own thing. Very interesting. A little bit on the slower side sometimes, though, for my taste, but I'm intrigued by the unique atmosphere. It also went to good tier. Then we have Vitriol with Suffer and Become. This Portland band bringing performances that are not only insanely technical, but also stupid heavy and menacing as fuck. I've seen them live and can attest to, like, they do perform this exactly how it sounds on the album, and it is pretty insane to watch. I will say that sometimes it gets dense to the point of being a little bit berating, but I think this album did a good job of stepping up the kind of dynamics. There's even some like subtle choral synths and atmospheric sections, and so it's not quite just like 11 brr the entire time, and people are loving it. I see a lot of people shouting this out as one of their favorites of the year. For me, I put it at fantastic. Then we have Drowned with Procul His. While this may only be this German death metal band's second full-length album, it's their first in 10 years and comes after a long line of demos and EPs going all the way back to 1993, and the raw production and songwriting choices here make it sound as if it was written and recorded from that era. There are some cool passages with the interplay of more atmospheric and even like black metal sounding guitars and ferocious drumming, but I'm very distracted by the kind of one-note growly vocal performance that feels also very forward in the mix to me. I know Chris, who does the written reviews on metaltrenches.com, like this a lot more than me, but For me, it just went to meh. By the way, if y'all are enjoying the video so far, as always, hit the like button. It really helps me out in the algorithm, as does commenting below what are your favorite and least favorite death metal albums of the year so far. But let's move along to Resin Tomb with Cerebral Purgatory. This Australian band has been making a name for itself over their EPs, and this is now their first full length, and they delivered on the same promise as those EPs. This is just gnarly, noisy stuff that feels like a cross between that classic HM2 Swedish sound with the more atonal technical stuff like, again, Artificial Brain and even Krallis too. Disgusting bass tone. Room to tighten up the songwriting a little bit, but I think these guys have a bright future ahead. I also put them at fantastic. Then we have Unaussprechlichen Kulten with Häxan Sabaoth. This Chilean death metal band has been at it for almost 25 years and continue to bring only the darkest of atmosphere with this latest full length. Kind of take Behemoth's The Satanist and crossbreed it with Dispelled Omega and Adversarial, another band we'll be talking about in future versions, but not Part 1, we will get to Adversarial next time. Anyway, seasoned heavily with some pretty shreddy guitar solos and the perfect ratio of death to doom, drawing further comparisons to like Incantation's Diabolical Conquest, which I talked about in our 90s album rankings by year for death metal. This is going to great. And we have Blood Red Throne with Nonagon. This Norwegian band is celebrating 26 years of existence with their 11th album. A lot of long-timers on here. It's been really cool to kind of like see both the old and the new. Still have a great mix of chugging brutality, Meshuggah-esque grooves, and explosions of melodic death metal leads. I think this is something that can connect and sort of bridge the gap for both modern fans and old school fans alike. It's not the flashiest thing on this list, but I feel like it scratches a similar itch that Suffocation did for me in a big way last year. So it went to amazing. Then we have Cognizance with Fantazine. UK tech death band here around since 2012. This is their third record following up 2021's Upheaval, and I would most recommend it to fans of techy yet melodic stuff like Inferi and First Fragment. Really impressive instrumentation, but again, kind of woven into pretty engaging songwriting. Standouts for me in particular, Shadowgraph, Futureless Horizon, and In Verses Unspoken. Crazy, crazy drumming, but these guys all work together as a well-oiled machine. It is another fantastic. It has been a strong year for death metal, so it's been hard to figure out what fits in the top tiers, but there was a lot early on that already took those spots. Speaking of which, we have Knoll with As Spoken.
Holy shit.
This Tennessee band brings some death metal energy, but alongside also some grindy, dark stuff like Full of Hell. It's like you combine Lord Mantis, Portal, Alterage, and Vermin Womb with like some Imperial Triumphant for good measure. Just a spiraling vortex into oblivion. The guitars are like swarming locusts more so than instruments, and yeah, just disgusting stuff. I've enjoyed their previous work too, but this was like my first big wow moment of 2024. So this landed at perfection. Some might call this more of a grind album, but I think there's more than enough death metal in there. All right, we have Morta SKuld with Creation Undone.
We are forced to adapt. It's a form of control. We are forced to believe.
This Milwaukee, Wisconsin band formed in 1990, and another one on this list crossing an impressive 30-year milestone. It's plenty heavy with a lot of chugging mixed with some more creepy-sounding melodic leads, great drumming too. But another one where a lot of people seem to love it more than I did, because again, my biggest attraction was the vocals. Once more, very one note. Just not a lot of interesting placement in the music to make it more engaging. Like, I just found it kind of dull. So unfortunately, this landed at meh for me. Another long timer here, we have Messiah with Christus Hypercubus. The 7th album from the Swiss death metal band, and their first full length with new vocalist Markus Seebach after Andy Kana sadly passed away in 2022. If you're looking for death metal that mixes old school heaviness with big atmosphere, this is likely going to be right up your alley. Personally though, I didn't find myself connecting with this one as much as some of their earlier albums. There's some elements with this band where it's like it's either really great or kind of really boring to me, but they're still bringing a lot of that 90s death metal energy. I put this one at good. Then we have Hideous Divinity with Unextinct. This is a band I've been following since 2017's Excellent Advenians, but this Italian tech death crew has been kicking around since actually 2007. Much like I said of Vitriol's album, their sound is incredibly dense and menacing, so much so that it can be also off-putting on the first listen. Sort of combine that with the grandiosity of fellow Italians' Flesh God Apocalypse, and you kind of have an approximation of their sound. They're not nearly as like symphonic and bombastic, but there's just some of that energy there. I don't think this is some of their best songwriting, but it's heavy as hell and the bass rips, I put it at great. Then we have Vltimas with Epic.
They suffer in silence. No word says that's not the first to go.
I almost considered not including this because it didn't feel like a very death metal album, but it's got members of Cryptopsy, Mayhem, and of course David Vincent of Morbid Angels, so it seemed weird to leave it out. I know they've previously been described as blackened death metal. There's like a touch of that here, but not really. I was, again, put off by the vocals here. I think his interesting, let's call it, half heavy metal vibrato growls are certainly going to be an acquired taste for new listeners, and look, I love David Vincent. I love Where the Slime Lives. I love Domination era, Morbid Angel, but this just did not do it for me, so it went to meh.
You blew it!
Then we have Petrifaction with Sever Sacred Light. The second album from another Portland death metal band, one I'd say most closely compares to Autopsy, but they also list influences that include Bolt Thrower, Coffins, and Demigod. Super old school, and I appreciate that they keep the death to doom ratio about 80-20, allowing for solid dynamics, but aggression above all else. It's brutal, it's caveman-like, and the pounding drums only further add to the primitive vibe. I'm putting this one at great tier as well. Then we have Contaminated with Celebratory Beheading. Another fan favorite here, and I'd say blurg is the key word when it comes to this Australian band. Lots of very cavernous, just gaping maw vocals and a mix of doomy and faster, more technical battering sections. I had one commenter compare it to None So Vile, and I wouldn't go that far given just what a classic that record is, but I do hear why the comparison exists. Not something I found to be the most memorable, but it does have some standout moments like Cosmic Shit Show, and it is definitely heavy above all else, maybe one of the heaviest albums on this list. It went to amazing. Then we have Aborted with Vault of Horrors. These guys have not put out a subpar album since Global Flatline, and this may honestly be among, if not their best. Like, frankly, every song here is fantastic. Just great start to finish flow. Emphasis on speed and heaviness, but masterfully broken up with some melodic and atmospheric parts on here as well. And their biggest list of guest spots to date, with someone on every track. We're talking members of Shadow of Intent, Flesh God Apocalypse, Angelmaker, Cryptopsy, Ingested, Engulf, Signs of the Swarm, Of Sulfur, Despised Icon, and my personal favorite, Archspire. This one went to perfection. Then we have Coffin Curse with the Continuous Nothing. This is the second album from this Chilean band, following up 2020's Cease to Be. Nice emphasis again on speed and somewhat blackened sounding guitar tremolos alongside raging D beats and extremely raucous bass. Also love the gnarly kind of burpy vocals. On the flip side, I'm not as in love with the doom elements, and most songs feel like they drag on about a minute or two too long. So yeah, this one a little bit mixed, so it landed around the middle at great. Then there's Suffer with Grand Canvas of the Aesthete. Suffer formed all the way back in 1989, dropping a few demos and a compilation in the 90s, but it wasn't until 2015 that they dropped a full length, following up that with an EP last year and now their sophomore effort, which feels like a perfect fusion of the current 2020 sound with plenty of Carcass as well as notes of Morbid Angel's Domination grooves. Songs could be a little bit tighter, with them often feeling a little bit repetitious. Again, after like 3 minutes or so, it gets a little bit, stretched out more than it needs to be, but other than that, I really enjoyed this. It went to amazing. We also have Devotion with Astral Catacombs. This band was formed in Spain back in 2012, with this being their third album. More very classic old school vibes I'd compare to like early Obituary, Bolt Thrower, and Grave. Lots of slower and mid-paced romps through sewer sludge, grooves broken up by skank beats. Pretty solid, just also very meat and potatoes, and I don't really love the vocal delivery, so it went to okay. Then we have Atoll with Inhuman Implants. Just a year after the already impressive Human Extract, this Arizona brutal death metal band is back with their 5th punishing record, and everyone here contributes to the fantastically crushing violence of this record, but I have to once more highlight the sickening jangle of the bass tone. Much like bands like Cytotoxin, they just take that foundation of sheer blunt force trauma and craft it into something that is strangely catchy. So this one went to fantastic. I'd put it pretty high up too. And we have the return of Necrophobic with In Twilight Grey. This Swedish band formed in 1998, and we've covered a few of their early albums on the 90s Death Metal Ranking by Year series. This is their 10th album, and it's kind of a mixed bag. There are some elements of this that genuinely bored me, which was surprising because I like a lot of their albums, especially their earlier stuff. Like, I think they have a stellar debut and then some other really strong ones mixed in there. And this is another album I saw a lot of people raving about the month that it came out, but I tried. I went back to it multiple times, and I didn't fall in love with it the same way other people did, but I still think it's quite good. So it went to great, but honestly, I could even argue putting it down to good. And then we have Job for a Cowboy with Moon Healer. After a decade, they did not let us down with this comeback. That can be a risky proposition after being away for so long and having expectations sky high, but I think that they met all of them. I'd say this album's like a cross between Rivers of Nile, Inanimate Existence, and the Black Dahlia Murder, just ripping into the guitar. Love Naveen Koperweiss's work on the drums too. You might know him from Entheos, and then Johnny still killing it on the vocals. Incredible album. You might have seen it on my best of 2024 metal albums so far list. It is going to perfection. Next up is Skeletal Remains with Fragments of the Ageless. This California death metal band formed in 2011 with this their 5th album, following up 2020's The Entombment of Chaos, and I think they just managed to make my favorite Cannibal Corpse album since A Skeletal Domain. From the riffs to Chris Monroy's absolutely searing vocal delivery to the production, that's exactly what this is and executed to perfection. Next up we have Mutilation Barbecue with Amalgamations of Gore. The debut full-length album from this Cleveland band, very heavy with a very late 90s, early 2000s vibe in both the performances and gritty production. Sounds like it could have come out alongside early Aborted and Cattle Decapitation. Another nice mix of groove with more battering elements, especially with that pingy snare drum. It is going to great tier, and I'm gonna slide this over just a little bit here to make some room. Next up we have Ingested with The Tide of Death and Fractured Dreams. The UK slamming death metal band back with their 7th album, and I've been up and down with their records over the years, with 2020's Where Gods May Only Tread being my personal favorite. Frankly, the first and second half feel like they could be completely different albums, with the former going for old school aggression and the latter going much more melodic, and frankly, it was very forgettable, and I saw a lot of people saying the same thing. I know some people enjoyed it, and you know, we all have different opinions. That's what this is all about. This is not objective by any means, but I've forgotten most of this as it's gone on, and I've revisited it several times. Just going to okay. Next up is Necrot with Lifeless Birth. This Oakland, California band formed in 2012 with Lifeless Birth, now their 3rd full-length record. Theirs is another soaked in the old school influences alongside other groups we've talked about like Skeletal Remains and Gatecreeper, never letting up on sheer aggression and bloodthirst though. This is just like super heavy stuff. There is the occasional more dynamic moment like the grooving, head-bobbing intro of Drill the Skull, but these still just bring the violence of Morbid Angel and Cannibal Corpse with no melodic twist for the most part. It is going to amazing. Then we have Adversarial with Solitude with the Eternal. It's been almost 10 years since this Canadian blackened death metal band released the incredible Death, Endless Nothing, and the Black Knife of Nihilism, so when this showed up in my inbox originally by complete surprise, I was instantly stoked. And once more, few bands so effectively fuse the raw and unkempt aesthetic of 90s black metal with the sheer brutality of death metal. It's like falling into a deep, fire-spewing chasm. I'm going to put it at perfection. And we have Crucifier with Led Astray. This US band was formed back in 1990, but didn't release their first full length until 2003. Unfortunately, as strong as the atmosphere is, I don't feel like this album has a whole lot more to offer than just that. The riffs and songs aren't super memorable. Much of the time I feel like I'm just listening to an inferior version of Portal. So this also went to okay. Next up is Hour of Penance with Devotion. The 9th album from this Italian technical death metal band formed in 1999, definitely hearing some similar vibes to Hideous Divinity as well as Vitriol and their incredibly fast and dense take on the genre that is impressively performed but sometimes berating to a fault. Giacomo's drumming in particular is absolutely insane. He's like an absolute machine on rippers like Breathe the Dust of the Dead, and so that is going to great tier. Slide it over some more. Then we have Coffins with Sinister Oath. Album number 6 from this death and doom band, formed out of Tokyo in 1996. Strong emphasis on groove and sort of splitting the difference between the two genres rather than alternating between them. Personally, between the repetitive, bland guitar work and fairly generic vocals, this does little for me other than act as mild hypnosis. So solid production, not at all terrible, but this was another one that ended up going to okay for me. Then we have Slime Lord with, oh god, I have to say this again, Chytridiomycosis Relinquished. I think I said that right. So for tracing back roots, there's definitely some incantation in the DNA of this UK death doom band, but more precisely I'd compare this to the likes of Abyssal, Malthusian, and Portal again. It has the same malevolent tunnel through the depths and give yourself to the void kind of vibe, especially on tracks like Gut Brain Axis. This one went to fantastic. Then we have The Last of Lucy with Godform. This is more excellent technical and progressive death metal in the same vein as The Faceless, The Zenith Passage, and Exocrine. Tracks like Sanguinary Solace are absolutely dizzying in their guitar work in a way that never forgets how to be catchy, and I love the little glimmers of their mathcore roots that add a nice touch of extra flavor. From the battering passages of violence to soaring melodic moments, I'd say that this is their best work so far, and it landed them a spot at perfection. Next up is Witch Vomit with Decaying Angelic Flesh. I'd also put these fellow Portlanders on a list with what I tend to refer to as that new wave of old school death metal, alongside again the likes of Gatecreeper, Sanguisugabog, Frozen Soul, etc. Each of these bands kind of has their own foundation in terms of which OG band they sound more like, and in this case I'd say again it's Incantation and also some Immolation, maybe a touch of early Entombed and Dismember. Excellent production and great cavernous dark void energy, just maybe not something I found myself dying to spin over and over again. So this one went to great tier. Making some room again. Next up is Brodekin with Harbinger of Woe. The 4th album from this Knoxville, Tennessee brutal death metal band formed in 1998. Much like I said, going back to their 2000 debut, their music makes for a fun and super headbang-worthy listen, but this constant gurgle approach to the vocals does very little for me and ultimately becomes very tedious after the first few songs. Well performed and produced, but not something I see myself revisiting anytime soon. I know some people absolutely adored this thing. For me, I ended up putting it at good. Then we have Benighted with Ekbom. Album 8 from this French grindy death metal band, continuing to deliver so many killer songs and moments here. Love the gang vocals and mathy breakdown on Morgue, and equally fun techie drumming on Fame of the Grotesque. But perhaps best of all, it's great to see that they also got Ollie of Archspire on Nothing Left to Fear. Another top-notch album from this very underrated group. It went to fantastic. Next up is Severus with Maze Envy. The second album from this LA Death Doom band that seemed to make an impression on quite a few people out there, including Anthony Fantano. The vocals alone are like a gaping maw, spewing locusts and black goo right in your face, even more so on Levitation Tomb, thanks to a guest spot from Derek Ridequest of The Faceless. Also incredible production with every cymbal strike captured in pristine detail and a few surprisingly serene moments as well with the title track. That just makes the return to the extreme elements all the more impactful by contrast. This one ended up at perfection. Next up is Deicide with Banished in Sin. Album number 13 for these legends, now 35 years into their careers, sticking to that old 90s no-frills mentality. Plenty of solid enough songs in the likes of From Unknown Heights, You Shall Fail, Faithless, Woke from God, Ritual, Defiled. That said, it's far from their best and pretty middle of the road overall, I would say. In fact, this thing has been kind of like slipping down the rankings month after month, the more the really good stuff has been coming in. So, like, it was fine, it was listenable. But if I never heard it again, honestly, I wouldn't care that much, so I put it at okay. Then we have 6 Feet Under with Killing for Revenge. Album 14 from Chris Barnes and Co., and if you aren't counting the Graveyard Classics covers, I was surprised to at least be able to slightly enjoy lead single No Nothing Ingrate, but unfortunately things go off the rails just a track later, and the vocals are just a chaotic mess on some of these. There are a few passable tracks here, but even the best ones just pale in comparison to the worst tracks on almost any album on this list besides it, I would say. So, landed at meh. Next up is Swamp Beast with Offering of Chaos, Lamenting in the Blood of Man. The second album from this LA blackened death metal band, following up the largely critically lauded Seven Evils spawned of Seven Heads in 2021. And much like with that album, I might be the oddball here in saying I think it's good, but I have a hard time really forming the same connection with it that others seem to be. It's sufficiently heavy, grim, and miserable, not to mention great atmosphere, but I think that other bands like, again, Adversarial on this list just do all of those things way more effectively. I ended up putting this one at great tier. I'll move this just so that we can see. Next up is Pathology with Unholy Descent. This San Diego brutal death metal band's 12th album since starting in 2006. Some pretty wicked guitar work and drumming, but it all just feels so familiar, and even more so, the burpy sounding vocal performances just make me laugh out loud most of the time. I'm fine with using these techniques sparingly for a punctuated moment, but when it's the entire album, I just can't take it even remotely seriously. I didn't think it was terrible though, so I'm gonna put it at okay. And then we have Gatecreeper with Dark Superstition. Now, I've never been a particularly big fan of this Arizona band, but their past records have at least struck me as enjoyable, if paint by numbers old school death metal. And while on paper a more melodic turn seems right up my alley, this was another big disagreement between me and the audience in that I found the execution incredibly underwhelming.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
So many people were raving about this and saying that it's like their favorite death metal album of the year, but I particularly find Chase's vocal performance here very I wanted something different. It's just so repetitive and frankly kind of annoying. I tried to love it, and there are some things that I like about it. I think this is maybe like a turn that could be better on the next album if they kind of polish some of those things up, but for me, I would say it's just good. Next up is Cognitive with Abhorrence. The fifth album from this New Jersey band formed in the 2010s, more high-octane technical death metal that feels like a good mix of both old school and modern sentiments, with every song a fun listen. I think that the clean vocals on Abhorrence and As the Light Fades could use a little more work, but I do think that just a little bit more polish in this area has a lot of potential to expand their sound. Overall, I would put this one at amazing. We also have Nocturnus AD with Unicursal.
cringe.
The return of this Florida sci-fi death metal band for their second record and featuring members from Acheron, Obituary, and of course Mike Browning of Morbid Angel and the original Nocturnus lineup. And while I love the key as well as aspects of the last AD record, this feels like we're drifting further and further from the actual death metal roots. The guitar work is plenty technical and really plays into the proggy sci-fi energy, but the vocal delivery strikes me as extremely milquetoast, so... This one, little disappointing, landed at okay. Next up is Ulcerate with Cutting the Throat of God. Album 7 from these highly proficient New Zealanders mashing up mesmerizing tech death with drifting post-metal. It feels very much like this album is largely picking up where the last one left off, leaning hard into the dark melancholy. I will say at this point I'm starting to crave some new twists and surprises. It's still fantastically performed and a cut above the usual generic death metal clones out there, but what was once so fresh and unique is starting to feel a little bit familiar, at least to a longtime fan like myself. So this will be a different year where it doesn't quite make the top or even the second tier. I'm putting it at amazing because I still think it's excellent, but they're just albums I enjoyed more in death metal this year so far. Then we have Malignancy with Discontinued. I was looking forward to this New York brutal death metal band's 5th album, and it's also their first in 5 years, following up the excellent re-recording of their 1999 debut. Unfortunately, a lot of this album falls into the style over substance category for me. It's extremely technical with absolutely dizzying performances, so I can respect that, but unfortunately rarely does any of it seem to be in favor of great songs. Unlike other tech examples here like Apogean, Exocrine, Vitriol, who weave their proficiency into infectious and memorable songwriting, this just feels like random and at times repetitious too in its chaos. So for me, that was another one that just went too good. By the way, I forgot to say, if you're enjoying the video, hit the like button. If you hate it, hit the dislike button, and also help me out by commenting below what are your favorite and least favorite death metal albums. Where do we agree? Where do we disagree? But next up, we have Severe Torture with Torn from the Jaws of Death. Another band with over 25 years under their belt and also from the Netherlands, definitely digging the brutality of the production with that chunky bass tone and the battering drums, plenty of solid riffs, but with the vocals, again, while serviceable, they'd get dull for me pretty fast. I don't necessarily see this one sticking with me much either, but it's still a pretty banger listen, so landed at good tier as well. And then we have Fractal Generator with Convergence. Album 3 from this Canadian death metal band, and it is a doozy. This is more of that dense, apocalyptic sounding technical stuff akin to Wormed, Hideous Divinity, and at times even Alterage and Imperial Triumphant. Fitting to the sci-fi imagery, it feels like being sucked violently into a black hole. I also dig these subtle synth elements, further adding to the cosmic vibes and overall eeriness, especially the choral ones, and so for all that, this one landed at fantastic. And just so that you can see the whole thing so far, here's where we're leaving off. Continuing our ranking of 2024 death metal albums with Wormed with Onagon. It's been 8 years since this tech death group out of Spain dropped the brain-melting Kriegsu, and 6 since the unfortunate passing of incredibly talented drummer G. Calero. The sci-fi concept continues, but the music has really stepped up the variety. V. Kazar steps in on the kit here, bringing just as much fury to the blast beats, now alongside some pretty surprising pace changes that make this album stand out from the last few, namely some grooves that wouldn't be out of place for Meshuggah. This one is going to fantastic. Then we have Ill Disposed within Chambers of Sonic Disgust. Call me a plebe, but I had no idea just how many albums this Denmark band had under their belt, with this now their 15th full length since 1993. They've definitely trended in a more groove metal direction overall, but the vocals are still pure death metal, and songs like The Ill Disposed take me to Morbid Angel's Where the Slime Lives, while others like Start Living Again have some Amon Amarth energy. It's on the slower side, emphasizing dark atmosphere and even incorporating some synth elements, all of which is captured perfectly by some excellent production. This one landed at good. Next up is Replicare with The Center That Cannot Hold.
This Boston tech death band blew my brains out with their sophomore 2017 album Do Not Deviate, only to disappear for the next 7 years, so you'd better believe this was near the top of my anticipated albums when I saw it come up. Highly impressive performances and all held together by some very dynamic and engaging songwriting, great sparing use of clean vocals too, and then the nearly 7-minute closer, Uncontrolled and Unfulfilled, throws in some excellent jazz elements as icing on the cake. This one landed at amazing. Next up is 200 Stab Wounds with Manual Manic Procedures. The second full-length album from this Cleveland old-school death metal band that even Papa Meat seems to love to rep in his videos. Personally, though, this is another of many bands in this sort of new wave of OSDM that I'm just sort of lukewarm on, like Sanguisugabog and Gate Creeper. They do a fine job of capturing that old spirit, but they rarely bring anything new or exciting to the table. It's a tight 30 minutes, but frequently I just find myself wishing I was listening to the classics instead. So this one also went to good tier. Next we have Summoning the Lich with Under the Reviled Throne. With a very similar approach to melodic death metal as the Black Dahlia Murder, from riffs to vocals, I was very excited to see their albums go head-to-head in some friendly competition. This one is packed with hooks and fantasy imagery, and yet another list topper for me in a year overflowing with great death metal releases. United in Chaos was already an impressive debut, but this sophomore effort showed signs of the band still just getting started, and it went all the way to perfection. Then we have Cryptasy with The Non-Return. Getting elements of Vader, Deicide, Autopsy, and Morbid Angel. Lots of fun shifting rhythms. The drums really cook on this thing. Tons of great tracks here like Hypatia's Heresy, The Void, and the very appropriately titled Ugh. That incredible bass on The Water Street Butcher is excellent. Just delightfully vile death metal that loves to spit right in your big, stupid face, and it landed at amazing. Then we have Fulci with Duckface Killings. The Italian giallo horror-obsessed death metalers are back, this time paying homage to Lucio's batshit insane film The New York Ripper. More just classic 90s old-school flavor in the vein of other gore-soaked bands like Mortician, but I also appreciate the occasional added flair of tracks like A Blade in the Dark, which is a very accurate portrayal of the music used in the films of this era. The one thing I don't really like is the sort of hip-hop infused left turn of Knife, which is just kind of out of place on this record, but still a fun album for horror fans especially. It is going to great tier. Next up is Abramelin with Sins of the Father. This Australian death metal band formed all the way back in 1988, yet this is only their 4th album, coming in the wake of 2020's Never Enough Snuff. And with help from Matt Wilcock of Werewolves and Ackercock and David Haley of Psychroptic, there's plenty for a classic death metal fan to enjoy here. All the same, I wasn't really wowed by this either. Enjoyable, but kind of forgettable. Deceased Estate is pretty good. This one ended up landing at okay. Then we have Ripped to Shreds with Sanshi. Now, this San Jose band is another one of the few OSDM bands from the modern era I would truly say is worth investing your time in, given their masterful ability to truly capture that 90s sound while also putting their own signature twist on it. Here they continue to pull on Chinese folklore and more melodic elements of the previous album, while also doubling down on sheer speed and ferocity, not so unlike the likes of Dismember and Early Death. The result is tracks that are as infectious as they are heavy, with Force Fed and Vision of Sin, Mirror of Darkness being especially potent in this regard. It went to fantastic, but you could potentially make a case for perfection. Then we have Monument of Misanthropy with Vile Postmortem Irrematio. More horror-themed death metal, but this time dealing with the real-life horrors of serial killer Ed Kemper. Conceptually not unlike Macabre's Dahmer, this record deals with the twisted man's life, but here with an extra fast and heavy approach more akin to the likes of Aborted, Benighted, and Cattle Decapitation. It landed at amazing. Then we have Ingurgitating Oblivion with Ontology of Naught. I'd basically describe this band as Tech Death's answer to Imperial Triumphant, although these guys have actually been around much longer. It's sort of gore guts meets jazz and a bad acid trip. Just pure madness, from the harrowing chaos of the death metal elements to the truly unsettling nature of whatever Last I Should Perish is. It's definitely not an album for everyone, but those who do make it through deserve some sort of medal. I am putting it at great tier. Next up is God Dethroned with the Judas Paradox. I really can't call this a death metal album because it is just so far removed from their earlier roots, and at this point just feels like a very mopey, generic black metal record with zero personality. I was so bored listening to this thing, which was all the more unfortunate since I was actually looking forward to it, and I enjoy their early material. So yeah, sadly, this one went to meh, which you can only see if I pull the board forward at this point. But moving on, we have Flesh God Apocalypse with Opera. Another grand entry from my favorite Italian symphonic death metalers. More bangers here in Morphine Waltz, Per Aspera ad Astra, and Pendulum. Ultimately, I think this takes all the great lessons learned from the incredible Veleno and translates that into yet another great new chapter for their sound with some of the vocal changes here. A very strong listen for symphonic fans, and be sure to check out my tier list of all of their albums. I put this one at amazing. Then we have Gigan with Anomalous Abstractigate Infinitesimus. I'm a huge fan of this Chicago band, previously named in my most underrated metal band series. This is their 5th album, and I could scarcely believe it's been 7 years since the last one, and while it takes a bit to get started, the opening track almost seems like it's a test designed to weed out the normies before we get to the real ragers. Their sound is one I would describe to newcomers as psychedelic technical death metal, or better yet, gore guts on acid again, I guess. So I'm putting this one at fantastic. Then we have Thorium with Bastard. The 6th album from this Danish band formed in 1997, and it is a goddamn ripper. Take peak era at the gates and dismember, add a little bit more grit and grime, and you've got yourself some new HM2 goodness for the ages. It landed at good tier. Then we have Merciless with Those Who Reign Below. One of France's premier old-school death metal bands, returning with their 8th album since hitting the ground running in the 90s. This album actually gives me a lot of similar vibes to mid-career behemoth albums like Zoskia Cultus and Demigod, with its blackened edges and bludgeoning approach to vocals and guitar riffs. Everything just feels caked in filth and maintains the raw, rebellious hallmarks of the classics, and plenty of wicked soloing, too. This one went to great tier. Then we have Nile with The Underworld Awaits Us All. Another banger of a release from the kings of Egyptian-themed death metal, and another perfect balance between insane technicality and infectious, ancient-sounding melodies. Love that we can get both epic longer tracks and some under 2 minutes that go just as hard with To Strike with Secret Fang. As always, it's just insanely technical, but also insanely atmospheric. So many great songs for a record I would put in the upper tiers of their discography, which is another one I ranked this year and you can check out. This one on this chart is going to amazing. Then we have Night Rage with Remains of a Dead World. This is the melodic death metal band's 10th album, having formed in Greece 23 years ago and now based out of Sweden. They very much follow the tenets of that old Gothenburg sound. Fantastic riffing that takes me back to listening to In Flames for the first time in the early 2000s, and a strong vocal performance make this a must-listen for fans of the genre. I put it at fantastic. Then we have Corpse Fucking Art with Tomatized. Album 6 from this Italian band, and it's another pretty generic, brutal death metal album if you ask me. Cookie cutter riffs, one-note gurgles, and very little of substance, even for a band that leans into the sense of humor. Nothing here I've not heard before a million times, and frankly I found it to be a bit of a chore to listen to, even if it has its moments and is far from the worst thing I've ever heard, so it is going to okay. And we have Dark Tranquility with End Time Signals. One of my favorite bands of all time, so I'm pretty biased when it comes to anything they put out. I'll admit that this is far from one of my favorite of their albums. You can check out this tier list as well. But with bangers like The Last Imagination, Enforced Perspective, and Unforgivable, there's plenty to enjoy here. Solid melodic death metal for 2024, even if it's not one of my ultimate top picks. But it did earn a spot on Amazing. Just for space here, gonna scooch this over a little bit more. Then we have Destructor with Indomitable. This Australian band's third album since forming in 1997, and it's a strong dose of more blackened death metal, right down to the upside-down crosses in their logo. Fuming death metal vocals and spotlight-stealing drumming are offset by jangly black metal tremolos and general blasphemous atmosphere. A very focused and consistently enjoyable listen, but I doubt I'll be thinking about it much a few weeks from now, so it got a spot on great tier. We also have Peeling Flesh with the G Code. Now, I saw a lot of people requesting this in the comments when I left it off that week's release list, but I have to say that for me, this is mostly just yet another example of why I don't care much for slam. I like some bands, but it's just a very paint-by-numbers approach to songwriting that by design kind of mostly bores me. And while the occasional fusions of kind of body count-esque hip-hop elements are kind of interesting, it's not executed in an effective enough way to save it from those aforementioned more generic elements, in my opinion. I'm intrigued, but just not quite sold, so this landed at okay. Then we have The Crown with Crown of Thorns. I've always been a little on the fence with this Swedish band, as should be apparent from their 90s death metal album appearances in those rankings, and I feel like that continues with this 12th album. Strong start with the thrashy I Hunt the Devil and Church Burner, followed by the more melodeathy Martyrian. After that, it's a little bit more hit and miss, but consistently enjoyable. Plenty to appreciate, but I just don't find myself overly gripped by it either. So I'm going to put this one at great tier. Then we have the Black Dahlia Murder with Servitude. Continuing this band after the loss of Trevor seemed like an impossible task, and while it doesn't quite live up to his 10 years stronger moments, I think that the lineup here is very strong, with Brian stepping in on vocals, with Ryan and Brandon side by side on guitars, and Max and Alan on bass and drums. Very tight 33 minutes of non-stop melodeath riffing with that trademark Graveyard Camp and some standouts in the likes of Aftermath, Evening Ephemeral, and Transcosmic Blueprint. A little more experimentation would be nice from here on, but it's a strong comeback. I'm going to put it at amazing. And then we have Undeath with More Insane. Despite seemingly being the only person on the planet who didn't much care for It's Time to Rise from the Grave, the new follow-up from this New York OSDM band absolutely knocked my socks off with its sheer speed and very tight, to the point, and frankly enthralling songwriting. Not to mention the riffs are a perfect combination of Cannibal Corpse intensity with the melodic hooks of At the Gates and Dismember. From highly infectious growl-along vocal moments to some pretty epic harmonized riffing and soloing, this album's brisk 34-minute runtime is packed to the gills with only the best, and that is why it is going to perfection. And here is the full chart. Thus far, you can't even fit it on one page.
Alright, moving into our final 15, we have Sentient Horror with In Service of the Dead. The fourth album from this rock-solid band in the Swedish style. I've consistently enjoyed their records, but rarely found myself coming back to them after the fact. Frankly, I had forgotten about them entirely until this showed up in my inbox, but seeing the name did spark the same level of, oh, I should definitely prioritize checking this out. Once more, good stuff with some fun riffing, but just comparatively kind of more of the same on this list overall. So I put them at good tier. Then we have Detest with A World Drowning in Detest. The third album from this Denmark death metal band, formed in 1990, more grimy, no-frills, old-school energy executed to perfection. Another one that really just captures the all-around spirit of the 90s, from its cavernous production to the brutal yet infectious songwriting. I'd recommend this one in particular to fans of Necrot, Obituary, and maybe to an extent Bolt Thrower. And they got a spot at great tier. Next up is Mitochondrion with Vitrectomy. Now when it comes to vile, atmospheric, blackened death metal, I tend to bring up Portal, Alterage, and Abyssal a lot, but not this Canadian band. Their sound is a little more on the technical Gorgutsy side, offering lots of eerie, winding pathways punctuated by more explosive moments like the scream that kicks off Ignis Caecus. Fantastic record that also earned a spot on my favorite metal albums of the entire year overall list. It is going to perfection. Next up is Massacre with Necrolution. Despite having formed all the way back in 1984 as a heavy metal band, this is only the Florida Project's 5th album. I like all the horror imagery and spooky vibes, but unfortunately this feels like another one marred by over-reliance on old school energy to the point that it feels a little bit redundant. Would have made for a fun listen during the Halloween season and has some highlights like The Things That Were and Shall Be, Shriek of the Castle Freak, and Shroud of Shadows, but I doubt I'll remember this a month from now. Is going to good tier. Then we have Defeated Sanity with Chronicles of Lunacy. The 7th album from this German tech death band formed in 1993, and they definitely maintain the sound of the early days of this genre in a similar way as Brodekin, Disgorge, and Deeds of Flesh. That said, I would put them a bit higher than similar groups on this list, as I think they managed to weave a bit more substance into the chaos and brutality. I can respect the insane speed and sudden pace changes of the guitars and drums while also actually enjoying some memorable songwriting on tracks like Accelerating the Rot, and that earned them a spot at amazing. Then we have Moss Upon the Skull with Quest for the Secret Fire. This Belgian progressive death metal band, back 6 years after landing a spot on my best of the year list with the previous album. I already went into this album with high expectations, but multiple times it compelled a very physical reaction within me due to taking some surprise turns. Incredible pacing too, with these 38 minutes seemingly painstakingly laid out in addition to crafting impressive individual tracks as well. They went to fantastic. Then there's Molder with Engrossed in Decay. The second album from this Joliet, Illinois OSDM band, and as much as I want to rep people from so close to my old stomping grounds, I have some issues that really drag down my enjoyment of this one. The riffs and music are solid enough if unremarkable, but much like my problems with Gatecreeper, the vocals get really obnoxious with the constant over-enunciation of the ow sound in particular. It just gets so annoying so fast. There's plenty of promise here, but let's just tone that down and make the delivery less repetitive, but yeah, went to okay. Then of course there's Blood Incantation with Absolute Elsewhere. The Colorado band back again with possibly their most forward-thinking record to date in a discography dedicated to innovation. 2 lengthy compositions here, but broken up into 6 tracks with incredible pacing and something new to offer every minute or so. Definitely getting some Opeth vibes with the acoustic and synth elements. The Message Tablet 2 gets very Pink Floyd, and very cool collab with Tangerine Dream as well. This went to perfection. Next up is Gutless with High Impact Violence. The debut full-length album from this Australian band, and it's another nice slice of very 90s sounding brutality full of gore, murder, and of course, violence. Fun groove to the guitars and syncopated vocals, as well as a more gritty production job that suits it. The songs are enjoyable, and it doesn't overstay its welcome. At just 8 pretty streamlined tracks, it is going to good tier. Then we have Misanthropy with the ever-crushing weight of stagnance. The third full-length from this Chicago band, highly recommended to fans of Gorguts, Ulcerate, and Artificial Brain. This is more highly technical death metal that also does an excellent job getting its hooks in you with memorable grooves and earworm moments amidst the usual cacophony of chaos. These guys can hang with the best of them with these performances while also understanding that they have a general audience to please and not just a room full of elitist jazz-trained musicians. So it went to amazing. Then there's Cosmic Putrefaction with Emerald Fires Atop the Farewell Mountains. album 4 from this Italian death metal band, and one that was commented quite a bit in its absence from my October list. Killer combo of blackened atmosphere with brutal vocals and technical drumming, and love that surprise little interlude with the twinkly synth and jazzy bass on Swirling Madness, Supernal Ordeal as well. And then things take even more of a turn for the finale, an excellent record full of performances that are as demented as they are impressive. Went to fantastic. Then we have Vatisnal Rites with Cascading Memories of Immortality. This London-based old-school death metal band is relatively fresh to the scene, formed in 2020. Plenty of Cannibal Corpse in the vocals and Floridian grooves, but also European influence in these spooky harmonized guitar leads on tracks like Plead for Termination. Nothing particularly mind-blowing here. You've definitely heard this sound before going back to the 90s, but another case of taking that old sound and executing it to perfection over a consistently tight 36 minutes. It went to good tier. Then there's Paganizer with Flesh Requiem. Another solid, if kind of predictable release from this Swedish band formed in 1998. It's their 13th album, and if you're just hungry for more of that old school Swedish death metal sound, you'll get plenty of that here, but not much else. Well performed, well produced, just doesn't do a ton for me, so it went to okay. Then there's Neckbreaker with Within the Viscera. The debut full-length from this Denmark death and groove metal band, and honestly, this feels more like what I was wanting from Gatecreeper. Emphasis on the groove with this headbang-inducing record that still does not skimp on the classic death metal guitar work. There's room for growth in trimming some of the fat with some of these runtimes and adding a little bit more unique personality. But even so, especially for a first-time outing, this is going to incite some serious mosh pits live. Definitely a band to watch. They are going to... You know what? They're going to fantastic. And then we have Opeth with The Last Will and Testament. The Legends back with their longest gap between albums and their first to feature death growls since 2008's Watershed. I'd say this perfectly fuses the more retro prog and classic rock elements of the last few albums with the heavy ones we know and love. Not to mention, pretty interesting to get Ian Anderson of Jethro Tull and Joey Tempest of Europe guesting. One of the most original and inventive albums, not only in the genre this year, but overall, and it is going to perfection. And now let me see if I can fit everything on the screen here for your overall view. Gonna have to shrink it down. There you go. There you have it right there. That is the whole shebang from this year. Y'all check out this playlist for more of the best and worst metal albums by genre ranked, or this one for my favorite metal albums of 2024. But that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.